here's one that I was like, you know what? It's good that I have other people coming on that understand this. How easy is it to sue after a home birth or birth center birth goes wrong? Am I likely to get a case?
It depends on your state. Yeah. And it also depends on if your baby took a breath. Like in my state, Texas, if your baby didn't take a breath, then they weren't considered alive. And so you can't sue for wrongful death. Like, so the lawyers won't take the case because there's less money to be made. Possible, like the settlements are so much smaller with a baby that was stillborn is what they consider it, that if it didn't take a breath. But if she had taken one breath, I could have gotten a lawyer, but I couldn't because she hadn't. So it really depends on like your state, and then, you know, how, if your baby lived at all.
There's so many factors as like what are their assets? It turns out the midwife, I found this out just a few years ago, all of her assets weren't in her name. And I think she did that on purpose. They were in her husband's name or her kids' names, and they had multiple mortgages, but none of them were in her name. You know,
I've heard of that many times with many people during lawsuits. They would also move assets out of their name during the lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think Danielle,
I've heard the same.
Yeah.
Same thing as that Mars had. They were renting a house here and she moved all her stuff around because first off, a big thing about getting a case is whether your state laws, if you even have any state laws, if you can get a lawyer. Lawyers do not take cases for somebody that is non-medical. And the reality is a nurse midwife outside of a hospital, normally she might not even have malpractice insurance either. She might still have a license, but you're still looking at, she's not a hospital. There's nobody over. She has no reason to have malpractice insurance. Like, you know, so that's another thing is people, that's a, I guess, misconception about nurse midwives. They're like, oh, you think the title, whatever, but so it wouldn't matter in my state. We have a couple, two of them, at least two of them that I know of that do them here. Babies die. Guess what? Nothing happens. Nothing. No lawyer's going to take the case. They don't have malpractice insurance. I got lucky. And my mom was referred the lawyer that we got, and he only took our case because he felt sorry for us. That is the honest truth. When he met us, he said, I just want to try to give you any justice at all because Nevada has no laws. So let me see what I can do. But he was like, but I'm going to tell you right now, before I even take your case, before we do anything, we look at anything, you're not going to get $1 from her. He's like, I'm putting everything in there that if we do go through this, I want her to pay for the court stuff. At least if we can do that and we can get it released to the public that this is what's happened to you. That's all I want is for your story to be heard, for people to know that this is happening. So we got a really awesome lawyer. But I can tell you, his boss was not happy that he took the case. He was not happy at all. And he actually sat down with us and was very rude about it and was like trying to change around like our deal that we made to make us pay for the services, which, by the way, malpractice, you do not pay until your case has gone through. So you go meet with them for free consults, and whatever happens with your case, if you get $100, they take whatever it is, you know, like it's like that. So they don't make very much money with malpractice unless you're going for the big guys, which is normally a doctor, you know, or a hospital, unfortunately. But with what we experienced was we did get through, we did put everything in. It was going to court. She had a couple options, and one of them was meet in front of the judge and settle. She could just settle with us and she could pay us whatever. Like if she, you know, doesn't have any money, whatever her deal was, she would just pay us every month or pay us whatever works for her kind of thing. Like you pay your bill or something, or you could figure something out with us, or she could do kind of like a jury trial. And that's an option. The judge kind of decides on whatever. But she took another option. She filed bankruptcy. That was her way out. She didn't have to, She didn't have to go to court. Yeah. She didn't have to go to court to settle with the judge to say, look at my assets, look at what I can afford, look at whatever, like, you know, like any other case of anything else. If you sue anybody with a civil suit, you go in and they say, look, I owe you this amount of money, or, hey, I'll pay you back what you paid. Nothing like that. She did absolutely nothing. She did bankruptcy just to get out of going to court with us because she knew that the biggest thing is, first off, she wasn't going to pay us. And second off, she didn't want to go to court, because if she went to court, we had so much crap on her. Like, she'd incriminate herself is the big thing. So yes. And she had already been in trouble in California. So she had lawyers in her pocket. She didn't have to talk to anybody. The lawyer called and was like, no, we're good here. And my lawyer was like, I'm so sorry, because this is so draining to go through all this process of reliving everything, affidavits that you have to do with people, going through all the, we had text messages, emails, phone calls, all the crap that you have to do. And then it's like, it goes nowhere. So if you can get a lawyer to take your case, they're going to look at if they have malpractice insurance. And then unfortunately, the midwives do know each other. They are all friends. They all know the system very, very well. They will find some type of loophole to get out.
Florida requires malpractice insurance for home birth midwives. So if you live in Florida, they are required to have malpractice insurance. So you should be able to get a lawyer. And I do know one family that sued a midwife in New York and was successful. They got a large settlement. That same midwife has settled with 2 other families, but that midwife makes well past $10,000 a month and so she has quite a lucrative business. So if the midwife has a lucrative business, then it might be a successful lawsuit, because they'll have the assets and they don't want to file bankruptcy because that's going to mess with their business. So
yeah. The only thing that comes to my mind is if they know that this birth center or this midwife has had multiple events, they could go in together with mothers together, sort of like a small class action, but they're protected.
Yeah. They know their way around, and this isn't their first thing. And even if you go through a birth center, we know from Florida, and we know from down south and other areas, that multiple babies die from birth centers from the same midwives. There's normally a team, maybe 3 or 5 of them. Like, it's normally kind of the number that they have. They lose the same, like they lose a bunch of babies sometimes that we hear about. We don't know before, we don't know after. These are the ones we hear about. And it's very hard, because sometimes the lawyers will kind of come together to try to do stuff, but sometimes the lawyers don't come together. It really depends on so many different things. And majority of the states, you're literally just getting a malpractice insurance, like lawyer, and hoping that you can go anywhere. But we even know from Florida, their minimum is, I think, 100,000. Like, Christina, you know what I'm talking about. It's 100,000. Like, I think it's like they can go and find these like little, like, not the regular places that nurses and doctors that work in hospitals actually go get their malpractice insurance. They find these other little places that give them malpractice insurance, and they get the bare minimum, and they pay hardly nothing. And we do know some of the moms that would have been on today tried to get to do cases of whatever, and the lawyers wouldn't even take the case, because the amount of money that they could actually win from the case
Versus the
would have
time
been
invested.
nothing.
Yeah.
Exactly. All the time going to court, all the stuff, all the work that they had to do, they're not, like, literally, they're not getting any money. The lawyer's not getting any money. The family's not getting any money. So it's such a crappy thing. The one thing that I would tell anybody advice wise is, if you have a state with laws, turn them in, file complaints. NARM is a joke. You can try NARM, you can do whatever, but you're going to waste your time there.
You're going to waste your time. It's going to be a headache. It's so much paperwork, and it's so depressing and not fun to go through, and they're not going to do anything.
Yeah. In California, your licensed midwives are regulated by the medical board. So you can file a complaint with the medical board, which is exactly what happened with Christy. And that's why she never got her license. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there is that. And, but other states, I don't know how it's regulated, and NARM is a huge joke.
And
It really
even in
is.
Florida, I know, I think her name is Charlie Ray Young, a home birth midwife that has had multiple injuries, deaths under her. And speaking aside from liability, even if she was sued, she still or has overseen like the state midwifery like complaint board. And so when you have a home birth midwife overseeing that, they're ultimately going to stay as a home birth midwife, being sued or not. So, I mean, justice for the family, yes, possibly, but like Florida, they don't have a lot of money, even if they do have malpractice insurance. And this, And again, I mean, they can sweep it under the rug and keep practicing. And I do know we've heard multiple stories and seen it in different groups. These midwives, home birth midwives, acknowledge and even say they know something's going bad during labor, and they would prefer, and it's hard to say, but they would prefer the baby to die in utero than actually try to save and get them to the hospital, or even try to get them to deliver, because it's better on their end. And it's hard to say that, but because of the baby did die in utero in a postpartum, they don't, like I think Liz was saying, it's hard because the baby did not take a breath after they've been born, and it's hard to pin it on the midwives, and they know it, and it's a tactic they use. And unfortunately, the baby doesn't matter to them. They're, they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to have to be sued. And we've seen it and read it multiple times, and it's disgusting.
And with the take a breath thing, my lawyer told me that if my son had taken one breath, that one breath is $1 million. That was just $1 million right there. But because of whatever, like everything happened, my son was still considered a stillborn. Because he didn't take a breath, he came out alive, but it was still kind of one of those. So he came out with a heartbeat, but with no breathing. So the lawyer that we got really, really lucky to find him. And we bumped into other lawyers, and other lawyers told us they would have never taken the case. And we've also bumped into other lawyers down in Florida, and that are more understanding toward grieving families. And they were like, I would have taken your case. And, so it just really depends. And sometimes you have to call around and just kind of keep going through that. But the thing is you're grieving, and a lot of people, they don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that. I got lucky. My mom found somebody, so I didn't have to make those phone calls over and over to get rejected, because I do know that's very, very common. And I know from calling my state board and calling everybody that you can, like NARM and everybody, you get rejected over and over and over. If you don't have any laws, there's nothing we can do. You don't have any laws, there's nothing we can do. Like, you get told that just over and over. So I would say the best thing anybody could do is be proactive before you ever go to a home birth or a birth center or anything, is know your state laws. Look up your state laws before you do anything, and then find out what you need to know about with midwives and all that stuff, because unfortunately, there might not be anything to do if things go wrong. We don't like to think about the bad side of stuff when we're pregnant and all that, or gonna plan ahead. But the reality is crap happens way too often.
And look at your paperwork before you
yeah.
sign it, because it might even say in there, that you would just go to arbitration, kind of stuff like that too. It's in your contracts with, yeah. But you don't know that going into it. You just,
Yeah, what you're saying about thinking about the worst outcome, how we don't do that. I want to point out something that we don't talk about as much on here, doesn't get talked about as much, but it happens often, is that not every baby dies. And if a baby is injured during birth, you're talking about major life circumstances. They're talking about cerebral palsy and hypoxic brain injuries. And this is children who are going to have, at a bare minimum, learning difficulties, but usually major physical differences, like being in a wheelchair, being G-tube fed, being on breathing apparatuses. And if God forbid, something like that happens to your child, that he or she is deprived of oxygen during the birth at the fault of your midwife, and they live, that lack of malpractice insurance, that lack of things, means that you are caring for your child without the adequate resources to care for them. And had that child been born in a hospital and it was at a doctor's fault, you would absolutely be covered. Your child would have everything they needed, like from therapists to nurses' aides and nurses and all that stuff that you are not going to get. And you're going to have a child. And I know several children that were born and majorly damaged at home births, and 2 of which have died since then as children. And then so they still died, but they had years of therapies and doctors and specialists and scrambling for care. And you can't take a child that is on a, a trach to a regular daycare. These are things that, need to be thought about, because the chance of that happening at home is astronomically higher than it is in a hospital setting. So since it's so much higher, more likely of happening, and the chances of any money to help support this child coming from the person who's at fault for it in a home birth, that's something to consider. Like, not every baby dies, and it's horrible when a baby dies, but it's also horrible if you don't have the resources to care for a child with major special needs that were caused by your healthcare provider.
And actually rolls to the next question, because the next question is, how do you deal with guilt and make peace with your birthing choices? And they went on to say, even if the birth didn't go well, or maybe your child was injured. So not just losing a child, but just things went a direction of really bad. And so it's really interesting that you said that, because that's actually the next person did ask about a child being injured too.
That's such a hard question. Like, it took me 16 years to go public with my daughter. And the guilt took years and years and years. I don't know that it ever goes away, to be honest with you. I think it's just something you learn to live with. I don't have a better answer than that, because I still have guilt. Even with all the knowledge, I used to tell myself that, I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. It's a little platitude, but it is true. If I had known better, I would have done better, but I didn't know. You just have to be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think also that you admit that you did make the decision, and that you would have made a better decision. And you also say that you will do better in the future, which is a big deal. And that it doesn't matter that you can't do the decision over. You will do better. You will try better. You will try harder. It's just what we want the midwives to do. If they make a mistake and it harms someone, we want them to say, oh, that was my fault. That was the wrong thing to do. In the future, I will not do this thing. And it's enormously frustrating that they don't.
Yes, that's it right there. What you said. That's what we wish the midwives would do. Like, we all know we can't bring our babies back. We can't fix our babies that are hurt. We can't do that, but we want the midwives to do better, and we want ourselves to do better. And that's all you can do. And tell our stories, because that means that if one person hears one of our stories and makes a different choice, and a baby lives, a baby isn't injured, then it's worth all this, all the strain of telling our stories, because that's what we can do to make things better. We can't fix what happened, but we can try to prevent things in the future.
Hearing all of your stories, it's helped us online, people that have not had these losses, to help advocate on your parts too, and just be able to retell and make other people, pregnant people, known what the risks are, and we kind of help with that. So I know it's never easy to keep sharing your story or the guilt, but you are saving lives, so we do appreciate that. I mean, the more we can share, the more we can warn people, and just let them be fully informed, because I think most people that make these decisions are not fully informed. We know these midwives lie, birth groups online. I mean, it's dangerous. So we appreciate you all sharing your story.
And I have to say, I have to agree that I don't know if I don't know if the guilt ever goes away. Like, I think it's become a part of us. I don't think it's the same as when you first figure it out, when you're first aware of what happened and what you could have changed and what could have made the outcome completely different. That right there, you have to deal with the shock, and you have to deal with all the grieving of just figuring that out, other than what you're already experiencing. So I think that guilt just sticks with us. It just doesn't go away. I think it just becomes part of how we live every single day. Yeah, I really think so, because I mean, a lot of people, when I say, you know, I'm responsible because I made this choice, I chose a home birth, I chose this midwife, I chose these things. And a lot of people will say, no, it wasn't your fault. And I'm like, even though I've accepted it wasn't my fault, I did make the decisions that she made for us. I didn't do, you know, like nobody ever wants that to happen to their child. But it's like, at the same time, I have to own up to the responsibilities of like, this was my choice, whether I was informed or not. And that's exactly what we spend. Like, I've spent years since all this stuff is going on of literally just trying to tell people, like, I didn't know, I was not informed. Please don't be like me. Please make better decisions. Please get better care. Because it's like, there's just way too many of us that fall into this trap, this huge trap that's just waiting out there, that I hate this is even a thing, but it seems like that just is what it is. You have so many people online that believe this natural way of life, but a lot of people that are spouting all this natural stuff, if you actually talk to them, they actually did have a hospital birth. They're not having a birth at home. They're not having a birth in a birth center. They're not, maybe they got a midwife in a hospital, but it's like, a lot of them will be spouting all this like natural stuff, but then it's easy for us to find that doula that says you can have your baby at home. Don't listen to that doctor, you know, whatever, or a midwife. So there's kind of so many key elements out there on the internet, unfortunately, of these people that some of them have had medicated births at a hospital, and then they're just mad at their doctor for ripping them from the experience that a midwife told them about. And then here comes this unexpected, like, first time mom that doesn't know anything. And here's somebody being like, natural's the way to go. And then here's a midwife. I do home births. Okay, I'm going to do a home birth too. But it's like, there's a lot more to it. And not that many people, I think, choose a home birth. Like, I think it's a little bit, it's still kind of like everybody kind of goes to the hospital because it's like the normal, it's just, they're there, we have them, people go to them. But people are falling into this business trap of what's going on outside of the hospital. So, and I hate all that stuff because I see it all the time, and it drives me kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie. Gonna lie, it drives me a little crazy because the stuff that you see, sometimes you're like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And I do understand, like, okay, doctors from 100 years ago or doctors from 50 years ago and all the stories that you hear, but at the same time, things have changed. The system has changed. Like, we've changed, like, more people are birthing in hospitals. Like, things have changed. Like, you're talking about a doctor that literally sees how many people a day, you know, like how many babies do they have a month? Like, there's just a completely different thing going on versus a midwife that sees, I don't know, 100, 200 over years of, you know, so it's like, there's a big thing. Like, I think people don't put it in the right perspective of like how it actually is. And yes, you can totally get your doctor in trouble if they do things to you. You can totally turn them in, and you can get a lawyer. And like, there's so many things, and people like, oh, bad things happen. Yes, but you can do something about it. Versus at home, you can't do anything.
Yeah, we've romanticized birth and babies in our culture, that it's this big romantic perfect thing that's happens, and we've kind of forgotten that 100 years ago babies died all the time, and the reason they don't die now is because we know about sepsis, we know about, you know, and things like that. And because things have gone so well in the last few decades, and our infant mortality has lessened, not necessarily in the States, but all over the world, people forget that bad things happen, and we have things for a reason. And I get so frustrated. These new moms, they come in and they're so upset because things didn't go the way they wanted to. And I'm like, it's because birth is not all butterflies and fairies. It's hard work. It's messy, you know, and it's not always life-giving, and it's hard. And I hate this culture where we romanticize birth on TV and movies, and it makes it so much harder for those moms that have trauma in their birth stories. You know, you just feel so alone and isolated. Like, why wasn't it perfect for me? It was perfect for Susie. You know, and that leads to the guilt too. Like, why did Susie get the perfect birth and I didn't? That's not fair.
But you know what, from somebody, I've given birth 9 times, and not one of my births was like any of my other births. They were all different. And I'm the same person, And like you just, it's always just like a roulette, like like every baby is different, every birth is different. It doesn't matter if you've done this before or your mom did it this way or your best friend had it this way. It's always different. I think, yeah, we need to hear more about that fact, is that your birth is not going to be like anybody else's birth. Like, not going to be like all the births you pinned on Pinterest. It's not going to be like, your mom's birth that she told you about 100 times you have memorized. It's like every birth is different and you don't know what it's going to be like, and you need to be ready for everything. And so when I go in now to the hospital and the nurses are writing stuff on the board, they're like, do you have a birth plan? I said, yep, I want a healthy baby. I'm like, I want my baby alive and well. And they're like, that sounds like a good plan. I'm like, that's the only thing I'm focusing on, because everything else, who knows what's going to happen. But you just know, I want this baby to come out alive and I want it as healthy as possible. That's what I want you to know. And I think that's the attitude that moms need to be able to. It's just like a fed baby. It's like the breastfeeding versus formula. It's like, you want your baby to live and be healthy and be fed. That should be your top priority, not, if the baby's getting breast milk or formula. When that baby is 10 and yelling at you about their homework, it's not going to matter if you breastfed them or formula fed them. It's not going to matter if you home birthed or you had a C-section. They're alive, they're there, they're healthy, they're doing homework. That's what you want. That's the end goal. This is just a temporary transitionary period that you're going for the other side. You're going for children. You're going for your child turning 30 and having their first child. This is the goal, and we need to focus mothers on, the goal is not a perfect birth or perfect breastfeeding experience. The goal is, having children that live on after us. Like, that's the goal.
Yeah. One of the things that this journey has taught me, and in terms of coming to terms with whatever happened, is helping other people learn what they should know and when they should know it. Because a lot of times people say, oh, I did not realize I should have known that. And it doesn't matter if it was a doctor or a midwife, they should have been given this information. Or sometimes things happen, postpartum hemorrhage, other emergencies. People aren't told right that minute what is happening or what will be happening, but they should be told afterward what happened and why it happened. This is something they deserve to have.